Civil rights group Section 27 is adding its voice to the call for the World Trade Organization to ensure equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. It says distribution must be based on need and not who can pay more. Let's discuss this now with the organization's Executive Director, Umunyana Rugege, joining us now from here in Johannesburg. Umunyana, good morning. Thank you very much. It's a huge global campaign that US Section 27 are joining from today and asking the WTO to consider a waiver that is going to help the access to COVID-19 vaccines. It's coming on the back of all kinds of concerns about what is known as vaccine nationalism. Why did US Section 27 feel it's necessary to be part of this global civil society campaign?
Dan, thank you so much for having me this morning. Just to correct you, we've been doing this work since last year because we anticipated that when vaccines do become available globally, that there would be an issue around equitable distribution. And while the World Health Organization was talking about this as well and encouraging governments, specifically richer countries, to ensure that they do not hoard vaccines when they come online. So we know that we have just received 1 million AstraZeneca Oxford vaccines, but that is a drop in the bucket, isn't it? And we know that countries like Canada and the UK are actually getting more vaccines than they have people. So Canada has the most vaccines in the world and could actually vaccinate 4 times its population. And at the same time, Canada in particular, the UK, the US, are objecting to proposals made by developing countries led by South Africa at the World Trade Organization to waive any patent and other intellectual property in the WTO, and that's what is called the IP waiver. Now, we support our government in this proposal. We think it's a very bold proposal, and we are calling on these countries today in a day of action to stop opposing the IP waiver at the WTO and to allow countries like South Africa to actually have a chance to access more vaccines than they currently are able to access.
Okay, is the practical outcome of the temporary waiver really about accessing more vaccines, or does it involve more things practically? Because the World Trade Organization, of course, is all about trade, as we know. Is it also talking to pricing, to cost, or is it just about being able to get it?
Look, it's all of those things, right? Because what we are seeing right now is that there's a scarcity of vaccines, which is why countries are trying to hoard more vaccines than they actually need. So what we do need is for more manufacturing capacity. But the pharmaceutical companies are essentially dictating the terms of how countries are able to access these vaccines, which means instead of having a solidarity approach, which is what the South African government is proposing at the WTO, the pharmaceutical companies are basically saying it's business as usual. We have our patents. We get to decide which jurisdictions we go into, where we decide to deposit our portfolios for the regulatory authorities in different countries. And South Africa right now has the AstraZeneca vaccine, but also Johnson & Johnson has agreed to deposit with our regulator, the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, the documents that are needed for us to be able to get those vaccines in the country. But what we need is more know-how, sharing of know-how, so that different manufacturers can actually produce those vaccines. And those are tied to intellectual property.
Yeah, and the waiver will assist in so to say, relaxing the grip on that intellectual property by those Western countries, like you've mentioned, the US, UK, and Canada. Is your call being joined by others who are thinking like you in supporting the governments of South Africa and India, for example, in this waiver call?
Absolutely. We've been collecting signatures since last year as a global civil society. So it's not South African civil society and Indian, but we're coming together globally with European countries as well, and Latin American countries to make these demands of the World Trade Organization to step aside. And I will add that we do have something called the Doha Declaration on public health. And that is essentially an agreement between all the WTO countries for precisely this kind of situation, where it says governments should be able to do what they need to do to protect public health. And right now we're in a pandemic, and countries, the rich countries are acting like it should be business as usual, and poor countries are left behind.
Now, Umunyana, this is fairly urgent. I mean, what more can you do currently? Because things are already moving, and you've mentioned some countries have been hoarding. We've just received the first batch of 1 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca and vaccine. We're waiting for more in the next few weeks, few months from the likes of Pfizer.
Right. So what else we can do? I think it's important to act both domestically and internationally. So our government is acting internationally at the WTO level. There are organizations that are coming together. We have partners who are pressuring the new Biden administration to change their approach in the WTO, because Biden, during his campaign, said there shouldn't be patents on COVID technology. So we are pushing for that sort of thing. But in addition, we're saying to our government, domestically, we also need to ensure that we reform our laws. And we've been advocating for this for many years. And in fact, in 2018, we got an intellectual property policy approved by Cabinet that actually balances public health and intellectual property. And what we've been pressing for now is for the finalization of the law reform that goes along with that policy, and to ensure that we're preparing our own legal environment for precisely these kinds of situations.
Thank you very much, Umunyana Rugege, and good luck with that campaign there. She's, of course, from Section 27, part of a global campaign calling on the World Trade Organization to ensure access to COVID-19 vaccines by waiving the grip that the Western world has on intellectual property around the COVID-19 vaccine.